Hello, and welcome to the World History Addicts podcast, a show where we discuss history and geopolitics from a social and anthropological lens. I'm Devon, and today I'll be talking with my co-host Nick about the 7 strangest countries in the world. Let's begin.
What's up, Devon?
Hey Nick, long time no see, my man.
I know. We couldn't meet last week due to my, that's going to be loud. Couldn't meet last week because I was a little sicky. I think I ate something a little funky.
Yeah, I know what that's
put me out of commission. But here we are, back at it for episode 8. Like you said in the intro, I guess today we're going to be talking about the strangest countries in the world. First of all, what made you want to kind of go over this? Because this is going to be a little different than our normal episodes where I'm kind of asking you questions about a specific historical event. This is more so going to be you kind of just going through a list, right? What inspired this?
Yeah, so part of that goes back to the intro because I'm always talking about not just the ideological lens, not the historic chain of events, or not the political history lens, but the social and anthropological one. And I thought to myself, well, how can I make the show about that without doing a whole episode on countries I think are genuinely unique and interesting, and really break the mold when it comes to what we think countries should be like.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And I know we have a top 7, right? So
Yeah,
that's a little strange number. It's probably, I'm assuming we're doing 7 just because of time, for time's sake. We don't want to drag this out for too long.
Yeah. The reason is both time, but also just because I wanted them to be the most strange countries, and I think it ended up being about 7.
Like the most strange countries, and,
Yeah,
and then after that it gets a little more normal after this.
Yeah,
That's one would say. Okay.
Yeah. The other reason is I wanted to space apart the different history trilogies, like the different histories of countries, because the next one that I'm planning is the history of Japan. That goes all the way back thousands of years. But I want to space those apart. I didn't want it to just be like one trilogy of a region or a country after another without many episodes in between.
Okay. Why don't we coming in hot at number 7, unless there's anything else you want to throw in here before we get the list.
So, before I start talking about the strangest countries in the I think it should be noted that every country is kind of strange if you look deep enough into their history.
True.
And I mean, strange is also really subjective because to someone from any of the countries on this list, America is probably very strange because it's this huge country on the other side of the world that speaks a language they probably don't understand and has its own strange ideology that's built around worshiping material stuff.
So I feel like America, like when you have like just massive land masses like America, Canada, Russia, China, like there could almost be multiple countries within those countries. So
yeah, I mean, in America's case, it actually was once multiple countries. If you think about, like, there's the Kingdom of Hawaii, there was Mexico, all the land taken from them. There were many, many different Native American tribes and nations that were seized, and of course, you also got different colonies too that they took land from, like the like Spanish Florida.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a great note. Again, this is kind of a fun episode. This is kind of more so just a little break from doing super deep dives into super, meaty topics. And if that's what you want, then go check out the other episodes. Come on, you already know what we're about on this podcast.
Yeah.
All right, coming in hot at number 7 is Turkmenistan.
Yeah, so Turkmenistan is a Central Asian country that's just north of Iran, and it's south of Kazakhstan and the Caspian Sea. So it's a landlocked country, even though it's bordering the sea, because the Caspian is in a very strange position where it's, I think, one of the largest lakes, but it's also not considered large enough to be its own ocean. Okay. So it's a very strange kind of body of water. And it also has a very unique blend of cultures because it's at the crossroads of the Persian world, the Arab world, the Turkic world, and the Russian world all at the same time.
Definitely.
So Turkmenistan started all the way back in the medieval era, like around the era of the Seljuks, because the Turkic people were moving from further east and north in Central Asia into the Middle East. And this only sped up after the Mongols began invading, and they started driving even more people out of that region into the Middle East.
That's wild. So they go way back.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, originally the Turkic people were what you'd call animists. They believed in this religion called Tengrism. I mean, that's not what they would call it themselves, because that's just kind of the worldview that people from that culture and region just nominally held. But
what was it called?
Tengrism, like Tengri. Yeah,
What?
there's like a literal like sky deity that they worship because of course they live out on the open plains, so the sky is everywhere. You can't really get away from it.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so I'm trying to look at this on a map. Turkmenistan, like you said, it's got Iran to the south and Afghanistan to the south, and then to the north, it's got Uzbekistan. This is just a coincidence that it's got the word Turk in it, as opposed to Turkey.
Yeah,
right.
Turkmen I think actually translates to the pure Turks because that's what the Turkmen are about. I think they're less mixed with the people who they conquered.
Okay.
I mean, they still are. I mean, all the Turks I think today are still a bit mixed, just due to the just by being in proximity to so many other different cultures and races and other types of people. Like if you go back to Central Asia, more of the Turks have more of a Mongolish look, but then if you go to Central Asia, they have a bit more like mix between Mongol and like Persian or Arab. And then if you go all the way out to Turkey, they have actually almost a Caucasian appearance because there have been lots of conquests into like the Balkans and converts and slaves too from Ukraine. And also they took over the native Greeks who were already there and the Armenians too.
Okay.
Yeah, so Turks look more white. Turkmen look a bit more mixed. I think other groups like the Azeris also are more mixed or more Persian looking. And of course, when you go all the way back to Central Asia, like Kyrgyzstan, they actually look very similar to the Mongols.
And you mentioned it's on the Caspian Sea. I'm looking at this on the map. It would be very helpful if you guys looked at a map with this too. But this is kind of a dumb question. But the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, right, the Mediterranean Sea. Are these all okay? The Mediterranean Sea, I can tell, is connected to the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
But are these other seas at all accessible from the ocean?
Okay, so the Mediterranean is actually accessible to the Atlantic through the Straits of Gibraltar. That's between Spain and Morocco.
There we go. I see that.
And
right
then
there.
there's also the Suez Canal that lets them go into the Red Sea, and by connection, the rest of the Indian Ocean. The Black Sea, and this is interesting. You actually have to go through Turkey to get from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean.
Right,
and that was actually
through
very
Istanbul. So you have to go up into the Mediterranean,
Bosphorus.
up near Athens, and then kind of just there looks like a little narrow path, right?
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why Russia's very adamant about having bases near Ukraine on the Black Sea, because that's actually a big part of their navy. They can move ships from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean.
This is really interesting. Never thought about that.
Yeah, the geopolitics are really interesting around this region because they don't get talked about all that much.
Okay, well, and here we are. Okay, so that's Turkmenistan. Anything else about them you want to go through?
Yeah, so after the Mongol invasions, they eventually settled and became this state called the Khanate of Khiva, and they actually were around for a very long time. I think at least like 500 years, from the 1400s all the way up until like the 1900s when they were finally conquered by the Russian Empire. One of the reasons was because the Khanate was this center for raiders, and because they would go out into both Persia and Russian territory, and they would just like capture people and take them back as slaves to Turkmenistan. And I think it got to the point where they said, literally no Persian crosses the frontier who's not being accompanied by like Turkmeni slave traders.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I mean, they actually were getting really hated by fellow Muslims too, because I think some of them actually said as an insult, if the prophet, as in the founder of Islam himself, came across them, they would enslave him too.
Whoa.
So yeah, it was a pretty nasty place at that time. So the Russians conquered them. They put an end to the slave trade. But then later, after the USSR rose up, they eventually became another Soviet republic, believe it or not.
Okay.
And it was like that up until 91, because then eventually the Soviet Union collapsed, and many countries in Central Asia just got their independence.
Okay.
They also got taken over by this dictator, and he ruled the country with an iron fist. And even today, they're still under the control of a new, different dictator. And probably one of the most repressive ones, because like Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il in North Korea, he makes these very specific rules, because he says that every car that isn't white is banned from the whole country. To the point that like if you didn't have a white car and you didn't get it painted, the government would actually just seize your car and even destroy it, because it's just not allowed. I'm not even sure why that is.
That's crazy.
Citizens of Turkmenistan aren't allowed to leave, so that's kind of like North Korea. But also, the government builds these huge cities, like mega cities, but they also don't allow people to move in and live there. So you got these huge, empty, like metropolis buildings, and It almost looks like something out of the back rooms. You know, the
Yeah.
meme, the back rooms. It's very liminal. You know?
So what's a lot? Why is that? Because you see people, you see that like people's. I don't know if it's true, but you see that like North Korea has those too. Like why? Well, but honestly though, I even see them like around here in LA sometimes. Not cities, but like big empty skyscrapers, right? Is this like maybe they're just maybe not so much in LA, but why would you think they'd be in Turkmenistan? Is this for show or is it because like
Yeah,
I don't like look we have
it's
cities
not
too.
entirely exclusive to them because also if you were to go to Myanmar, there's this. I think it's in the city's called Naypyidaw, or is it? There's another one called Rangoon. There are these huge like cities in Burma as well, and if you go there, it's completely empty.
Wow, that's
Or
really
if it's
interesting.
not empty, it's basically empty. Like if you go there as a tourist, you can just walk around. There's just no one there.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the reason could be the government has these plans for how to build things, but for some whatever reason, they aren't very good at actually executing it. So when they build these places, people don't actually move there. Like there was all this bureaucracy over who can be there, and eventually it just ends up with no one being there, and you just have these huge empty cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it might also have to do with corruption because, like, when you have these governments where the like public funding is being funneled into making these mega projects, if you're part of the upper elites and you control that, you can actually just build stuff to get the money and not actually do anything else. You can just basically profit off of it and just pocket funds for it.
Man.
I think the term for it is basically like bridges to nowhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, so the Turkmen I thought are also really interesting because I think they have like the most East Asian appearance, like racial appearance out of all the people in the Middle East. And that's mostly because they're just the descendants of people from around Mongolia who moved there and mixed to a degree, but I think they mixed less than like say the Uzbeks or other or like the Ottoman Turks in Turkey. And admittedly, it is a bit lower on this list because if you look at other parts of Central Asia, there are lots of strange countries there that don't quite fit the mold. Like I mentioned, Uzbekistan, and also there's Kazakhstan. That's another very strange country.
Yeah.
But I thought that Turkmenistan is it has the most the combination of all these different traits. And I mean, the other issue is that Kazakhstan is already really well known because of the Borat movie.
Oh man, yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like that. Oh my god, yeah, that movie was crazy.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's actually another thing to keep in mind with the rest of this list. I purposely picked countries that are very obscure because I could have picked like say Russia because it's this bizarre massive country that stretches from Finland to Korea, which is weird, but it's also really well known. I mean,
Yeah.
I think most people know what Russia is. Most people know what India is, even though that has a lot of bizarre history.
Yeah.
I think most people know what Japan is, even though Japan is also very unique. So some countries I think were a bit too mainstream to make it to this list. And
Absolutely. No, this is great. This is great. You don't hear much about these countries. They don't get their fame as much as they should, and they're important. There's people there, and there's important things that have happened there. So it's good that we are covering this.
yeah.
What's next on the list?
At number 6, we have the Kingdom of Bhutan. It's another landlocked country, but this one, instead of being in Central Asia, it's in Inner Asia. That's in like the area between India and China, like
Okay.
around the Himalayas.
I'm trying to find this right now. Near Nepal. Oh yeah, right next to Nepal. Right?
Yeah, between
Yeah.
Nepal, India, and China. It's
Oh, it's a smaller country.
It's a very, very small country. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why it isn't as well known, just because they don't do very much and they aren't very involved in the rest of the world. And they basically hang out in Bhutan and chill. That's kind of what their country's about.
I'm no like geographer, but looks very mountainous.
It is. It's really difficult to get to this region. And I
Okay.
think that's probably why, because it was founded over 2,000 years ago by migrations of people from India, but it only became Buddhist in the 600s. I think that's about 900 years after the founding of Buddhism. And and keep in mind, this is around the same time that that Buddhism was moving into Japan. I'll actually cover that in my History of Japan trilogy.
Okay.
But so this is the same time as the rise of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula and at the time that Buddhism is spreading to Japan. But it's only now that it's starting to get into Bhutan, even though Bhutan's right on India's border.
Yeah.
And I think that could just be a testament to how difficult it is to get there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, dude, I mean, I'm sure there's still trade routes and people got to get supplies, but is there also a lot of like just people?
I think there are these floodplains that are near the region, and they those can be used for farming. But I mean, even then, it's just really difficult to get to.
Looks like they've got an airport in Thimphu or Paro International Airport. Wow, man, this is cool. Okay, Bhutan. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
I was
the,
sidetracked.
So the Tibetans actually once ruled over over Bhutan, and that was back when they were still independent and not under the control of a different Chinese dynasty. Because the control over Tibet didn't actually start with the current People's Republic of China. It goes all the way back to for one, it goes back to the Qing dynasty. That was during the 1600s and to the early 20th century. And before that, there's also the Ming dynasty, and before that, there's also the Yuan dynasty, which was the one that was run by the Mongols.
Yeah.
So the Portuguese were the first Europeans to visit Bhutan, and I believe it was because they were visiting China, and they went through Tibet, and they eventually bumped into the Bhutanese. And so they're the ones who introduced firearms and gunpowder to the region. And as I said before, just due to how landlocked it is, and because it's in the middle of these huge mountains, it doesn't have very much contact with the rest of the world. And most of its conflicts have been with different dynasties in Tibet.
Okay.
But in the 1770s, the Brits start moving into India. And from India, they start harassing the Bhutanese and trying to take territory from them.
Really?
And in the 1860s, they eventually managed to see some of their territory, but because it's so remote, and I think they didn't have very much that the British were interested in, they took some territories called the Bengal Duars, which Duars are like these floodplains, I think to the south of Bhutan, but they didn't annex the whole country. So Bhutan is one country that actually managed to get away with not being colonized by the Brits. And this was at a time when the Brits were actually at their height of power, the late 1800s.
Okay.
And then in the early 1900s, the Wangchuck dynasty took over Bhutan, and they're actually still there today. So Bhutan is a semi-constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
They have parliament and they have a constitution, so they're not absolute monarchists like, say, Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
But they still do have a king, and it's I honestly think it's really fitting because it is in effect a theocracy, because the entire culture of Bhutan is built around a very fundamentalist following of Buddhism.
Okay.
And instead of GDP, the people there actually care about gross happiness and the gross happiness
Like
index.
that's an actual measure they have.
Yeah, because they
Wow.
they don't, I don't think they, and I mean that kind of goes with the Buddhist philosophy that's like the more you own, the more unhappy you'll be with life.
Yeah,
Because
true.
I think and I think there's actually a lot of psychological weight behind that, because I think once you go past a certain point, like once you start making over a certain amount of money, the added money actually just starts creating more complications, because you become more and more afraid that it's like either someone's going to try to scam you out of the money, or just want to gain more and more, but it doesn't actually make you much happier.
True. Wow. And then on the next one, you said it has one of the weakest militaries in the world.
Yeah, which is interesting, because that kind of means that Bhutan actually lives up to its religious philosophy of nonviolence and just extreme pacifism.
Whoa, man, that doesn't sound like a bad place.
It's a really chill place to
Sounds like
live.
a pretty chill place to be, man. Imagine that. Like I almost imagine just like a nice little village in the mountains. And have you seen Batman Begins?
Yes, I think it's actually. I think that's actually might be in Bhutan itself.
Right, like you know, at the very beginning of the movie,
Tibet,
he gets out of a prison, and then he finds this like not shrine, but like a little village up in the mountains.
The mountain monasteries.
Yeah. That's what this is. That's what I'm thinking of when I think about this.
Yeah, it's very much that type of vibe. In a way, Bhutan's kind of like if a Buddhist monastery was a country.
Yeah,
in a
wow.
way.
Dang. Okay.
And now to basically the entire opposite of that, we have Equatorial Guinea at number 5.
The entire
So
opposite. Okay.
looking at this, it almost reads like a dystopian novel. Like
Equatorial Guinea. I gotta find. Is that what the country is actually called, or is it just called Guinea?
I believe the name in Spanish, because it's a Spanish-speaking country in Africa. It's Guinea Equatorial.
A Spanish I did not know that existed.
It's the only Spanish-speaking country in Africa.
Spanish-speaking company. Okay, I'm sure you're gonna get into why that is the case.
Yeah, they
Spoiler
were
alert, maybe colonization.
they were a colony of Spain for I think over a century.
So on the west coast of Africa, right?
Yeah, the west coast.
Okay. Wow. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so it was a former Spanish colony and the only Spanish colony in Africa, because the Spanish focused pretty much all of their effort onto colonizing South America and parts of Central and America and the Caribbean, like Honduras and El Salvador, and eventually Mexico too, and like in Cuba and the Dominican Republic. And they also had the Philippines, but between all of that, that's basically it. I mean, Spain didn't have any colonies in the Middle East, as far as I know, and they also didn't have many colonies in, say, the Far East, like Northeast Asia.
Yeah.
But they did have Equatorial Guinea, and interestingly enough, it's actually the richest country per capita in all of Africa, which is wild. But that's because of its oil exports, because it's basically a petrostate. But it's also one of the most unequal, and apparently 70% of the population lives on only $1 per day. There's a crippling amount of poverty in this country.
Okay.
And the reason that I said that it sounds like a dystopian novel is that the country's capital is quite literally an island off the coast of the mainland where all the elites live.
Whoa, this is like...
Yeah.
It reminds me, have you seen what is it, the Last Jedi? One of the Star Wars movies? Maybe it's The Rise of Skywalker. That's like literally what goes on in the movie in one scene.
Yeah.
Well, what island is it? I see there's a couple islands.
I think it's the largest...
Orongo?
island. Hold on, let me just look this up. Yeah,
this is crazy.
I think it's Malabo. That's what it's called. That's
okay.
The largest city. I think that's one. Hold on. Yes, it's called Bioko. That's what it's called. Located on the north coast of Bioko Island. Yeah, there it is, Malabo. It's when I read this, I was reminded of this movie called Elysium. It's a sci-fi movie where it's like a dystopia, and all the wealthiest people, like the billionaires and maybe the mega billionaires, live on this satellite that circles around the Earth, and they have access to all these incredible technologies, but no one on Earth is allowed in.
Whoa!
Yeah, it's like only for the super wealthy.
This is tripping me out right now. That's like you can come up with like a novel, like you said, about that kind of stuff. Okay,
yeah,
so that sucks. Those elites suck. While the rest of the country toils. Okay. Did I see in here? Did we skip over this minor detail that the former president was?
The former president was an actual cannibal.
Who is this guy? I need to look this guy up on Google right now.
I believe his name was Nguema Macias.
How do you spell that? Nguema.
The thing is that
Macias.
there are actually
Francisco?
two of them. I don't think both of them were cannibals, but yeah, I think it was a uncle and nephew.
Widely remembered as one of the most brutal dictators in history. Okay. He exhibited bizarre and erratic behavior, and people believed him he was insane. Man, this is wild stuff.
Yeah, he was a very eccentric kind of figure.
Man.
He was actually apparently friends with Kim Il-sung of North Korea.
Okay.
It's kind of funny just thinking that like all these dictators are like friends with each other.
Oh my gosh.
And the really weird part is like, despite being a black African, he was actually a big admirer of Adolf Hitler, which is just insane.
Oh man.
It's really weird, honestly, because if you look throughout much of Africa, you can actually find lots of these dictators who actually support Hitler, despite his racial views. And I think the reason is probably because their country didn't directly suffer under the Nazis or any Axis regime, because their main colonizer was either like in this case it's the Spanish, but in other cases it's the French or the British or maybe the Belgians. But none of these guys really had much to do with Hitler, so the Third Reich doesn't have the same kind of bad name there that it has in the West.
There might also be some kind of class analysis there, like if their class interests are in the same interests as the fascists, then it doesn't, and even though the fascists are racist, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, they're going to make tremendous amounts of money off being in line with these guys, right? Or their standard of living is just going to be a lot better for themselves, I guess, is a better way to put it.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the other reason is just that these guys are totalitarians. They just view any previous totalitarian leader as a model to follow, even if their other views are completely opposed to each other. Because they can agree that they are the ones who should act as kind of the god among men.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's also been called the Auschwitz of Africa. It's literally that bad.
We could do this. Could be its own episode. That's scary. This is tripping me out, man. Okay. Anything else about Equatorial Guinea? Equatorial Guinea.
Yeah, believe it or not, Christianity was actually banned in Equatorial Guinea just because the dictator in charge believed that no one else should be worshipped except for him. That's his only reason for getting rid of it. It had nothing to do with his own membership in part of a different religion. It had nothing to do with like his political ideology of like Marxist-Leninism and the view that religion is the opiate of the masses. It had nothing to do with that. It's just they were taking attention away from him, and that wasn't okay.
Some of these dictators are just the most petty guys.
Yeah, it's like I was saying, if a Buddhist monastery was a country, it would be Bhutan. But I think in this case, if narcissism was a country, it would probably be Equatorial Guinea.
I mean, you weren't joking when you said this is the exact opposite of the last one. The last one was I was like getting really nice, happy images in my head. This one's just making me sad now.
Yeah, it really is one of the edgiest countries out there.
Edgy. All right.
Yeah, and the reason I picked it is that, I mean, across Africa, there are many countries with failed democracies, dictators, and mass violence. But I think this one managed to stand out just because of how insane the ruling tyrant was, and just because there are all these unique geographic features, like the capital where all the elites live being an island off the coast of the country. And also because it's the only Hispanic country in all of Africa. So I thought that made it pretty unique.
And okay, so what about how is it now? Do we know the state of the nation now?
Well, the thing is that it's still very poor and it's still definitely very corrupt. But I do think at the very least the president isn't a cannibal. So there's some progress being made.
Jeez. Okay, dang. All right, that's Equatorial Guinea. We're not going there anytime soon, Devon.
Yeah.
What's next on our list?
Okay, so next at number 4, we have Oman. This is a country to the east of Yemen and the southeast of Saudi Arabia, and it's on the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay.
So one of the big reasons why it's unique is there are two major branches of Islam. There's Sunni Islam and there's Shia Islam. The Sunnis are the consensus. I think they make somewhere in the ballpark of like 90% of like the entire Muslim world.
Wow.
Huge. The reason is they believe the Prophet Muhammad, who's founder of Islam, was actually, excuse me, it's the Shias who believe that Muhammad's descendants should be the leaders of the Islamic world. They have this idea of succession. It's kind of like if you think about Christianity, they have the apostolic succession, like the idea that the Catholic Church is the direct descendant of Jesus and his apostles.
Okay.
So there's kind of like a
before.
holy line of succession that goes from the founder and the prophet to
Sure.
the current authorities.
Okay.
Most Sunnis don't actually think of it in that way. Their view, I think, is more that it's just whoever's the most qualified should be in charge.
Okay.
I guess they have more like the Protestant view of like just whoever actually believes and follows the teachings are qualified, and it doesn't actually matter where they're from.
Sure. So that's sorry. That's Sunnis, and what do Shia Muslims believe?
Yeah, the Shias are the succession types. They
Oh,
believe in
section.
that.
So, okay, I got you. So really, that's the difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then you have Ibadi Islam, which is this third branch, and I think they took a middle ground. That should be something like the original followers or the what are they called? The successors of the prophet should be in charge, but they don't need to be. So it's kind of a middle ground between the two positions. And Ibadi Islam is very controversial, and I mean extremely controversial if you go into it, because the people who founded it were actually radical extremists and heretics called the Kharjites, and they went on this rampage throughout the Rashidun, and later that's the first great Islamic empire.
Okay,
Arab
the
empire.
caliphate, right?
The caliphate, yeah. So they went on this rampage, and they killed huge numbers of people in the name of like extreme fundamentalism, and they even killed one of the most important men in Shia Islam, a man named Imam Ali, and for that reason, they were very hated. So-
That doesn't sound good. Wow. Yeah. Okay. By the way, so just to scratch my own itch, those caliphates, the Rashidun and the Umayyad,
yeah.
are these the ones that ISIS were trying to emulate?
Yes, I think they're trying to go all the way back there. These guys were around in
Got
the 600s, 700s AD.
But are people? So you're saying people still do subscribe to this Ibadi flavor of Islam, right?
I mean, it's
Sorry,
really
that's not the right word.
really toned itself down since the 700s. And I
Gotcha.
mean, mostly they're just trying to lie low because they're a tiny minority.
They got a
in
bad
this,
rap in the past.
in a sea of people who don't subscribe to their way of thinking. Because there's the Shia, they make about 10% of the Muslim world, and then you have the Sunnis who make up about 90%. I think Ibadi Islam takes up probably less than 2 or 3%, maybe even just 1%.
I didn't know that it was that big of an imbalance. I thought it was like 50-50 Shia and Sunni, but
No,
wow.
it's big.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna
Yeah, the reason why I think the Shia have been able to maintain such a large footprint in the Middle East has more to do with unity, because the problem with even despite having the huge numbers, the Sunnis are often always infighting. Because
Okay.
you got like the Salafis, the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia. They're the guys who I think are the ones who ISIS's ideology flowed out of.
Okay.
And then you got more moderates and some like crypto non-Muslims, like the ones in Turkey, because they don't care all that much about the religion. But that's starting to change. But nominally, their views, I think, is that any kind of terrorism in the name of Islam is just fundamentally unacceptable.
Okay.
But to the Wahhabists, it's actually almost demanded, and they don't really view it as terrorism. They view it more as like resistance fighting.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then where was I? There's actually they're also the Ibadis are also kind of a product of infighting within Islam itself, and they also focus heavily on opposing other forms of Islam and actually less on fighting non-Muslims. I think this is probably because they live on the Arabian Peninsula. They don't really have much exposure to outside religions like Buddhism or Hinduism or what's it called, Christianity. So most of their beefs are with Sunnis or Shias. So that's mostly who they care about the most. I would describe them as kind of like the Muslim equivalent to like the Amish or fundamentalist Baptist, with a bit of the Eastern Orthodox localist stance and very restrictive views on who can be saved. Because I think with the Sunnis or Shias, their view is that you should believe and you should follow the faith. I think the term is deen. But in the Ibadi case, if you commit certain sins, you're just out, and there's no forgiveness for you.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that I think sets them very, very much apart from the rest of their Arab counterparts is that they have a very long history of seafaring and fishing, which is also why they became a maritime empire instead of like a land empire. Because if you think about most Arab and really most Middle Eastern empires are land empires. You know, the Persians were a land empire. The early Arab caliphates were a land empire. The Ottomans were a land empire. The Mongols who took over the land and converted themselves were also very much a land empire. But Oman breaks the mold because they actually decide to expand into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Oman itself was actually occupied by Portugal in the late 1400s, but the English and the Dutch and the Persians too, under the Safavid dynasty, actually fought them in the Battle of Hormuz. That was in 1625, and foreshadowing alert, there actually might be a second Battle of Hormuz if the U.S. ever gets into a war with Iran today.
Okay.
The Strait of Hormuz is this small strip of water in between the Arabian Peninsula and Iran.
Okay.
And it's very important for oil shipping today.
That's like it goes around Dubai, right?
Yeah,
I'm looking at the map. Okay,
there,
gotcha.
Yeah, so in the 1700s, they were one of the main competitors to the Europeans in the Indian Ocean, and they actually took part in some overseas colonization themselves, like in Zanzibar.
Okay.
It was in East Africa. So it was an African colony with an Arab ruling elite, which eventually boiled over into massive race riots in the 1960s that ended up with the Arabs and other minorities like Indians and the Parsis. I think what's his name? Freddie Mercury was actually one of those people. He was from this minority called the Parsis. They're like overseas Persians.
Okay.
Living in pretty much everywhere. I think they originally moved to India, but then since then they've moved around.
Freddie Mercury from Queen.
Yes, Freddie Mercury was one of these people.
Okay.
And eventually they were absorbed into the British Empire because that's unfortunately just what happens when you're on the coast, and the Brits have decided that they need a port.
So for nowadays, because I see that it borders the United Arab Emirates, right, which are very friendly to the West, right?
Yeah, I mean the Arab Emirates are basically a playground for very rich Westerners and
Sure.
really rich international
you
elites.
put it in the way that I want to put it, but. Where's Oman stand on that? What's their current geopolitical situation?
Well, the thing is that they're still an absolute monarchy, just like Saudi Arabia, but they're not considered as despotic or as crazy when it comes to like fundamentalism or funding of terrorists or any of that.
Okay.
But the main reason that I picked Oman is that I don't think it's all that well known, and it also breaks the trend of having of Arab states or really any kind of Middle Eastern empire just being based solely on land trade and land conquest, because they were almost entirely and exclusively a sea-based empire.
Okay.
I mean, it makes sense that they are just because of how important the Silk Road is. I mean, the Ottomans absolutely knew that, and that's one of the reasons why they became so powerful.
Okay.
But in Oman's case, they decided to go for a completely different strategy, and they made something very unique along the way. At number 3, we have Haiti. This one's much better known, but I thought that because of how insane its history is, it deserved a mention here.
There we go.
So Haiti is actually the western third of the island of Hispaniola, which is actually the same island that Christopher Columbus landed on back in 1492.
Okay.
The eastern half is the Dominican Republic, and those two absolutely don't get along at all.
Okay.
So Haiti was originally a Spanish...
Really? So Haiti and Dominican Republic don't get along?
Yes, there's a lot of very bitter history between those two countries.
Okay, people need to remember. Part of my whole purpose of being on this show as co-host is to learn from Devon. Devon teaches me history. Like I've learned so much, and there's just these little things that you would never guess that I have now learned that Devon has made clear. So, anyways, that was just a side note. Cool.
Yeah. So Haiti was originally a Spanish colony, and it was part of the Captaincy of Santo Domingo. But in 1697, there's this treaty called the Treaty of Ryswick, and it ended the 9 Years' War fought between this gigantic anti-French alliance in Europe because the French were getting too aggressive. So these other powers decided to step in, band together, and stop them. You had the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Holy Roman Empire, and even a few other states like the Scots, like Scotland, because they hadn't united with England yet, and the Savoyards. They're these other guys, and they're like a royal family that's based in southern Europe against France. And eventually, I think they were able to fight them to a stalemate, and eventually the French managed to still take part of Spanish territory in the Caribbean.
Okay.
So I'd originally viewed the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 as basically the end of religious conflicts in Western Europe. But it seems that even in the late 1600s, persecution of the Protestants by Catholics was actually still a big enough issue that it created diplomatic problems. And in this case, that was actually one of the reasons why the Dutch actually stepped in to fight off the French.
And this is in Haiti? Oh, sorry, what is...
This is actually still going on back in Europe, because this is why Haiti was even a French colony to begin with, because of this war fought in the late 1600s.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so they named their colony Saint-Domingue, and they created one of the, arguably the most horrendous slave plantation colony in the whole region. That's saying something, because already the conditions in, say, Jamaica or Cuba are notoriously pretty harsh, but Saint-Domingue, that later became Haiti, was even worse because they brought hundreds and thousands of West African slaves, and they worked them to death from the 1600s, that's late, like 1697, all the way into the early 1800s. So basically
horrible.
200 years.
Dude, okay, so can we pause there? 1600s to 1800s. Like, that's entire generations of people who only knew that their entire lives, and their parents and their grandparents. Like, we just look at these numbers and kind of brush over them as just facts, but when you think about the humans involved and what they went through, like, this is horrible, horrendous.
Yeah. But of course, the French eventually led to the end, because they had their French Revolution, and that led to the Haitian Revolution. Because once the idea that all men are created equal spread to the colonies, the Haitians were thought, well, doesn't that apply to us too?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in 1791, the Haitians got together. They actually had this voodoo ritual, and as they ended it ended in this gigantic tropical storm, and they took that as an omen that it was go time.
Yo.
So they armed themselves and began slaughtering the slave masters on Haiti.
Did not know that it started that cool.
Yeah.
That is like apocalyptic. Wow.
Yeah, so the revolution was very brutal because the French sent dogs to devour rebels and their children too, and they also boiled them alive inside like cauldrons of syrup, and they actually like invented early gas chambers because they actually got like volcanic ash or soot from the volcanoes. They put them inside the holds of ships and just packed slaves in there and just gassed them to death.
This is...
Yeah, wow. So, but eventually Haiti managed to win, and a major reason is that yellow fever was a major, it was very deadly, and it killed off many of the French soldiers. And of course, the French were also fighting in other conflicts too at the same time, so they couldn't put their whole military into defending Haiti.
Wow.
So eventually they won, but they had to pay huge reparations for their own freedom because, well, the French could just say, if you don't pay us, we'll just keep harassing you and make sure that your country can never progress.
So they ended up paying reparations. That's dumb.
But the Haitians also expanded into the Dominican Republic, as in they invaded, and that's one of the reasons why the two countries hate each other so much.
Oh, okay.
They also went through major isolation because they had just abolished slavery by force, as in the slaves did it by force, and it wasn't emancipators or abolitionists among the whites acting on their behalf.
Wow.
And because many of these colonies still had slaves, they absolutely didn't want those ideas getting out into their slave plantations. Man. But also that means that Haiti is kind of a time capsule because it's one of the last places where voodoo is still a major cultural force.
Yeah.
And I mean, from what I've heard about it, most of the rest of the Caribbean still has some influence of it, but nowhere is it as strong as in Haiti.
Whoa.
And skipping forward all the way into the early 20th century, the U.S. Marine Corps was actually sent into Haiti to occupy them because Wall Street had interest in the Caribbean. So they were sent in to suppress the locals. And believe it or not, the term gooks was actually originally used for Haitians because the Marines would actually kill them for sport. And this was well before the Pacific War against Japan or the Korean War or the Vietnam War.
Oh, I see. Before it was applied to like...
Yeah, they would just have this term called bumping off gooks, which was just a code word for just like using Tommy guns to shoot down Haitians.
It's horrible.
Yeah, but it gets worse because later in 1937, the Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo carried out the Parsley Massacre, also known as El Corte, or the cutting in Spanish, because there are all these Haitian illegal immigrants on the western border of the Dominican Republic. And they would go around just asking people. They'd had parsley, and they would ask, "What is this?" And I believe the term in Spanish is perejil. That's for parsley, but it's different in French, so they could tell if they were French Haitian
just by the way they said
or
it.
Afro Dominican. Yeah, they could tell which one they were because many people on the west coast or the western border of the Dominican Republic were also look very similar to them because they're also the descendants of slaves. But to them they were still Dominicans because they were still Spanish. The Haitians were considered foreigners, so they just went ham and started killing them with axes and machetes and knives and all that.
Okay, so hold on. Why did Rafael Trujillo do this? Like, was it just he woke up one day and decided to go ham, or was it like obviously things probably built up to something and then it just turned into a bloodbath? This is like borderline genocidal right here.
Trujillo was always kind of a dick because he was mean to his own people too, and he was also. I mean, it got to the point where the CIA had to have him assassinated because he was becoming such a menace to the region.
Whoa.
Yeah,
it's wild that like the CIA. So like the CIA will want their puppets in like these regions so that way the U.S. can go in and do their thing and everyone can make money and everyone's like, almost destroyed the microphone. Yeah. That way everyone can make their money and things are cool. So they want these people, but then it seems that once these people get a little too wacky or get a little too brutal, like okay, what am I trying to say? The CIA, they're always messing around and like they don't really know who they're messing with until they realize, oh, we just like funded and propped up this insane person. This exactly. Insanely brutal.
I mean, just look at the Taliban. I mean, if it hadn't been for the CIA funding the Mujahideen back in the 80s, the Taliban probably wouldn't exist.
And today. it just happens like this is Strangest countries all over the globe. We talk about world history addicts, but like this happens everywhere. The CIA does this everywhere, right? I mean, and not that like
that's kind of that's basically what their job is.
Exactly.
Infiltrate, destabilize. Extract information,
and so you just look. I don't know, man. Like obviously, like context matters. These little details, these little skirmishes and histories on these regions, of course, matter. But you look at this. There's just a massive umbrella of U.S. and European colonialism that seems to be a huge part of the problem. Anyways, I'm gonna keep going before I go on a dad rant.
In the 1950s, there was then a dictator named Papadoc Duvalier, and then he took over Haiti with his son, and they set up this secret police force called the Tonton Macoute, and they're actually named after this Haitian children's boogeyman called I think it translates to Father or Uncle Gunny Sack. He's like this guy who like takes children away.
It's scary.
If they're naughty or something. If the kids don't obey their parents, this Tonton Macoute guy is going to come by and find you. So
it's like that's like El Cucuy in Mexican culture.
I guess it's kind of like that.
Cucuy
but yeah, that's the secret police of this of the.
They called themselves that.
Yeah, they called themselves the boogeyman.
Dude, this is crazy.
Yeah, so they would they carried out some pretty massive atrocities from.
Sorry, no, I'm not laughing at the atrocity. I just laughed at the wrong time. But I'm just like in this episode, we're really going over the strangest things.
Yeah, it's really weird.
This honestly. One, and you know what? Halloween's next month. This is likely going to come out. Maybe this is a Halloween episode, right? I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, it would be kind of like an American dictator seizing power, like naming his special forces like the Slender Men or something.
Oh, that's just so creepy, dude. It's scary. Okay, anyways.
So, Yeah, but of course, the bad news unfortunately doesn't end because then Haiti got hit by an earthquake in 2010 and then a cholera epidemic in 2016. And today, Haiti is a failed state. I mean, there's not really any better way to put that. The country is currently being run by a government that doesn't have very much power. And I mean, it's getting to the point that the Kenyans are actually want to send an expeditionary force to restore order.
Yeah, I saw that.
And there's also cannibals just roaming around in Haiti, and there's also really dangerous armed gangs. So, yeah, it seems that Haiti's misfortune has not subsided, and it will probably be this way for a while.
Okay.
Not forever. I think eventually things will start to calm down, but we have no idea when this will end. Yeah, and it's just for that reason, because of both the history, the culture, and just what's going on today. I ranked Haiti as being one of the most strange countries. Even though it's well known, I think it's still like the sheer strangeness of it made them get pretty high on this list.
You know what though? I actually am pretty fascinated with the whole voodoo aspect of things. Like I'm pretty squeamish when it comes to like, I don't know, creepy. But not to say it's creepy. Voodoo, it's part of their culture. It's not creepy. It's not. At the end of the day, that's what they've been practicing for hundreds, maybe thousands of years.
The thing is, I think a lot of it's been very misrepresented. Like the voodoo dolls, I don't really think that's actually how it works. It's
Seriously.
kind of like a Western view of what it's supposed to be.
Plus, growing up as an American, especially an American who went to church a lot, like you just are averse to anything that could be associated with magic, or not that voodoo's with the occult, but like with the occult or with things that are, I don't know, obviously anything that's not Christian, then that's a whole other freaking conversation. But like, I really would be interested to look into some stuff like that, because it's really interesting.
That being said, too, Haiti actually is also still a majority Catholic country. And
oh, really?
I think most of the people there aren't voodoo practitioners. It's just kind of this cultural force that's still there in the background, because it is their roots.
And I bring that up because our neighbor, she passed away recently, rest in peace. She was Cuban, and she's from Cuba, and she practiced Santeria. And
that's kind of like a syncretism of the different religions, because part of it I think is Catholic, but there's also, I think in Santeria's case, there's a bit of like the indigenous.
Very much so. I believe Santeria was, forgive me if I'm butchering this, but kind of a combination of Catholicism and some other African religions that basically they had to practice their religion in secret under like some kind of like Christian Catholic guise, I guess you could say.
Yeah, actually, never mind. It's not indigenous American. It's West African combined with Catholicism.
There you go. The point I'm getting at is, we again, Santeria being another thing that's, it's evil, it's magic, it's blah blah blah. But then no, we're just ignorant, dumb Americans. Like we would hear them praying, right? People would come over, and she was a santero, which I believe is a person who is kind of the priest in that situation. And she would bless people, and they would pray. And ultimately, man, like it was a really eye-opening experience to be able to live right next to someone who does that, after my whole life being told that it's like weird or scary. So anyway, that's a whole side note. Voodoo's probably similar.
The thing is, and I've noticed this with many types of religions from outside the West, it's not even really just about the beliefs. It's more about like the practices and kind of like the heritage that goes along with it.
Sure.
I mean, most folk religions are like that. It's not just, you don't, in a way, I almost wonder if you have to literally believe it, when it's more about just like remembering like where your ancestors came from.
A lot of
like
heritage.
Why you are where you are today.
Remembering history, traditions that you've passed down over generations, like keeping them alive. Yeah. That's all good stuff. Anyways, we're coming down to the wild. Oh, go ahead.
For the second place, we have
number
Paraguay.
2. Paraguay. Okay.
So Paraguay is also in Latin America, but this one is in Latin America, and it's also another landlocked country. So Paraguay began all the way back in the 1500s, and that's when Spanish conquerors, explorers, and settlers started arriving in the interior, because that's where Paraguay is. It's very far away from the coasts of South America.
Yeah, I see it.
So the Jesuits were actually there. Those are like the priests within the Catholic Church who were working for the Spanish Empire. They took a major role in founding the country, and they wanted to create an independent Christian nation with an indigenous majority. And they actually got independence really quickly in the case of all the revolutions going on in Latin America. And I think the reason is they were just so far away from the coast that it was really difficult for the Spanish to send in reinforcements to keep in control. And also because they were fighting a much more pressing war in Mexico at the same time, because that was the most important out of all of Spain's colonies. They got the most resources there. There's the most money being made out of Spain, or out of New Spain. That's what they were originally called.
Mexico?
Yeah, Mexico.
Yeah. And Mexico was the Aztec Empire, right?
Yeah, that's where the Aztecs originally lived.
Yeah.
So one of the very strange aspects of Paraguay that I believe actually is why they got to this list is that the indigenous Guarani language continued to be used in spite of the colonization by the Spanish. And it got to the point that white Spaniards actually reverse assimilated and began speaking the same language as the people they just conquered.
Reverse assimilation, never heard of that term before. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like if the Mormons who traveled to Hawaii to convert the locals actually ended up becoming Hawaiian speakers themselves. Began adopting like Hawaiian rituals as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but it gets stranger because like the previous entries on this list, Paraguay has had a series of very bizarre dictators.
Okay.
And I think this particular one who took power right after independence is arguably one of the strangest. His name was Jose Gaspar Rodriguez de Francia, and his father was born to he was a Brazilian father, but it's actually rumored that he had some African ancestry.
Okay.
And his mother was Spanish Paraguayan, so the descendant of colonists. And this is something of a point that's been debated because the idea that he was the son of a mulattoes or mixed race man would actually have damaged his status at that point back in like the early 1800s. Mm-hmm. However, de Francia was a very radical anti-racist, and his solution to racial inequality was actually to force everyone to get into some type of interracial marriage if they did get married. He banned marriage between white Spaniards.
That's like,
because I don't know of any other place in the world that mandated this policy. This is extremely radical,
like you
especially for the time.
Okay, so you said radical anti-racist. I was like, cool. Solution. Okay, like cool. We're gonna encourage people to do their thing. Oh, we're gonna ban same race marriage. Oh, it's getting really weird again.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah, the crazy part is it actually kind of worked because by doing this, they created a homogenous nation where everyone is a bit mixed, and they don't have the same type of stratification along ethnic lines that neighboring countries have. Like in Bolivia, it's kind of almost a quasi-apartheid nation with the descendants of the Spanish being at the very top, and the average person there being a indigenous Bolivian who's a peasant,
okay,
or at the bottom of the social order. And because the two countries actually went to war in the 30s over this area in between called the Chaco region over oil, and the Paraguayans managed to win just because their nation was much more patriotic because everyone felt as though they had something to gain from winning the war, whereas for the average peasant in Bolivia, they're just fighting for the interests of these guys who look down on them and are visibly very different from them, so they didn't care as much.
Man.
So before that. De Francia governed his country very well, and I mean this is insane because imagine like America breaks up into many different states, and there are all these independent countries popping up from like maybe there's a new Republic of California, and the leader actually manages to leave the treasury twice as full as it was when he entered office.
Oh wow! Dang.
I mean I don't think any U.S. president has ever managed to do that.
Wow. I'm sure Trump has claimed to have done that.
Well, of course, if it's Trump, he claimed that. He must have said that there was 5 times as much money as there was 100 times as much.
Yeah, when he did it better than anybody else.
Yeah. But then after de Francia left, the Lopez family took power, and Francisco Solano Lopez became the dictator of Paraguay, where he was an absolute disaster because he declared war on 3 large countries that were neighboring Paraguay. He declared war on Brazil, Argentina, and this faction of Uruguay, because Uruguay was in the Civil War. There was a Colorado or Red Party, and there's the Blanco or White Party. And Lopez supported the Blanco faction who lost. And the war was horrific for Paraguay. Like 70% of the men in Paraguay died. I think something like 40% of the women died because at some point they started running out of adult men to send to the front. So they ended up sending like teenage boys with fake guns and mustaches to inflate the numbers of the military. And the Brazilians just mowed them down. It was insane. I don't think there have been many wars
about this. I've heard about the fake guns thing. Which is
It was.
Whoa.
Yes, this is by far South America's bloodiest war, at least since the days of the original colonists moved in and spread all these plagues that killed off I think something like 90% of the population. But since that and since the independence wars, this has been the bloodiest war in all of South American history.
That's wild.
Yeah, and the crazy part is this was actually going on at the same time as the Civil War in the U.S.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the mid 1860s. And then late in the 20th century, Paraguay became part of Operation Condor because the U.S. backed the purge of leftists and socialists across the entire continent, which left hundreds of thousands of people dead and many more tortured. The dictator of Paraguay was actually a mixed German and indigenous Paraguayan descent guy named Alfredo Stroessner. And he became really notorious because he would order people to be like hacked up with machetes or with chainsaws, actually, and he would listen to what was going on over the phone. So he was almost like a cartel running a country.
Is this so? This is during Operation Condor.
Yeah, the 1970s.
Oh, this is crazy, dude. 70s were a real wild time for South America.
Yeah.
God.
Across the world, the 70s were a really turbulent kind of decade.
And again, there's three letters of a guy running around doing that. CIA.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah. So today, Paraguay seems to have calmed down. They don't have crazy people banning same-race marriage. They don't have people declaring war on 3 countries at the same time. They also don't have chainsaw guys cutting people up over the phone. But they do have some pretty strong ties to the Bolsonaro regime in Brazil. And other than that, I mean, I think the reason I picked them is just that they have such a bizarre cultural kind of trajectory that seems unlike anything else I've heard anywhere else.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine another country just like banning same-race marriage?
No, dude.
It basically doesn't exist.
You really hit the nail on the head with this list because it started off pretty chill, and then the subject matter of this episode has just gotten like wilder and wilder as we've gone down the list. And I don't know how this is all gonna do. I already see number one. I don't know how this is gonna like number one's gonna top all this in terms of like crazy violence, but wow, dude. Okay, this is
Yeah, and now we have number 1, and that is Vatican City, which on the surface seems kind of weird because like it's just like Vatican City. Why is it so strange? But the reason is because it's actually not the ancient history, because it's, today it's the rare city-state in our modern world. I mean, if you think about most of the city-states like Venice and Genoa eventually got reincorporated back into the Kingdom of Italy.
yeah.
But the Vatican's origins actually go all the way back to the donation of Pepin in 756, where one of the Holy Roman emperors actually granted the church lands for free just so they could host the church and as a sovereign entity. And the popes actually reigned on this land for over 1,000 years. But in the 1800s, we already went over in the Italian episode.
Yeah.
The Italian nationalists started up the Risorgimento, which is the reunification or even the rebirth of Italy, and that included absorbing the Papal States, which is where the popes were hanging out.
Yes, a little side note on that. We have a whole trilogy of Italian history that you don't want to miss.
Yep. Episodes 2 through 4.
Yes. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, but by this point, the Pope had become a major jerk, and he was refusing to recognize the Kingdom of Italy, and he also wanted to excommunicate anyone who was involved in bringing down the Papal States. And he also just cursed the entire Italian national project. So for over 50 years after the end of the Risorgimento and the incorporation of the Papal States, the Pope went into cope mode, and he refused to support Italy. But in 1929, so over 50 years later, it actually took Benito Mussolini, the fascist ruler of Italy, to sign the Lateran Treaty, and he gave the Pope an enclave within the city of Rome to govern as his own kingdom. Because other than that, the Pope just wouldn't shut up about why Italy sucks. So,
dude, see, like, there's a trend that I see with all these characters, these very notable characters in these countries. They all are all very petty guys, man. Why you gotta go into cope mode for 50 years? What are you doing for 50 years?
Yeah, come to think of it, though, I mean, I don't even think it was the same pope. So there were multiple popes going to cope mode. So in order for the next pope to be succeeded, he had to promise to go into cope mode as well.
Immediate coping.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Couldn't be me.
Yeah. So then in World War II, there actually were some limited bombings of Vatican City because the U.S. military was very cautious about this. By this point, there were many Italian and Polish and Irish American members of the military, and they didn't want to tick them off by bombing the most holy site in Catholicism. The British were actually less sympathetic about this because there were Italian planes flying over London during the Blitz, so they didn't care.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there were some limited bombings. I think some bombings went a bit astray in some parts of the Vatican where actually we did get bombed. But the damage was pretty limited, especially compared to what was going on in other parts of Italy and the rest of the war.
Uh-huh.
But the strange thing about Vatican is just the nature of what type of country that it is, because it's the smallest country in the whole world. It's smaller than Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's a country. It's not a city. It's a country.
Yeah, it's a city that's actually smaller. It's a country that's smaller than a city. It's located within the city of Rome itself. Okay. It's smaller than Hong Kong. It's smaller than Singapore. Smaller than Macau, Monaco, or any Pacific Island nation like Fiji or Vanuatu. You'd have trouble finding on a map because they're so small. The Pope is an absolute monarch of Vatican City. He has unlimited power, and really that makes him the last absolute monarch in all of Europe, which is pretty crazy. And in order to be a citizen of Vatican City, you have to be invited in by the Pope as a member of the Roman Catholic Church, which means that you can't actually be born a citizen of the Vatican. You actually have to be born outside, like be born into an Italian family as a citizen of Italy, and then you're granted citizenship of the Vatican.
Wow.
And the other interesting thing is, despite being an absolute monarchy, they actually have no prisons. And I think the reason is because it's so small that there's not really reason to have that. They have temporary holding cells for trials, but the rest of that work is actually done by Italy. Men make up 95% of the citizens of Vatican City, and there's no other country that comes even close to this extreme demographic.
Whoa.
That's like 19 out of 20 citizens in Vatican City are men. And I think it's mostly because there are lots of priests and there are also like security forces.
Yeah.
Vatican City actually contracts out these guys from Switzerland called the Pontifical Guard.
Really?
And they've been doing that since the Middle Ages because these guys are just very well trained and they're very loyal. And I believe at one point they actually were the last line of defense because these other German mercenaries were actually plundering Rome. In the 1500s.
The Pontifical Guard.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They have this really cool uniform. You should look at it.
I was going to say, I want to look up these guys. Pontiff.
Yeah. I mean, today they have, they have like modern like combat gear. They have like the bulletproof vests, combat vests, and assault rifles. But they still do have like the ceremonial medieval uniform that they used to wear like hundreds of years ago.
There's a boss on Dark Souls 3 that his name is Pontiff Sullivan, and he's the worst. And it's just Pontiff. So Pontifical Guard, the Swiss Guard?
Yeah, the Swiss Guards. Yeah, they have this really bright-looking kind of outfit.
Oh, is it this guy with the stripes?
Yeah, they have all these really colorful.
Oh, he's got the halberd.
Yeah, they have the beret. They got the striped.
He looks like an NPC in Dark Souls that you'd have to fight. This guy is not messing around.
Oh,
That's a really cool.
Yeah, they take their job very seriously.
It's a really cool vibe. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So ecclesiastical Latin is the official language of Vatican City, and that actually makes it, in a way, the last real remnant of the Western Roman Empire.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember I was watching this video about a hypothetical scenario where, if a Roman citizen from, let's say, the late Roman Empire was transported to our world, who should they talk to? Who should they contact first? And the creator of the video concluded they should go to Vatican City because even though it's not exactly the same, the Vatican is actually the last place that still speaks Latin.
That's wild. Didn't know they spoke Latin.
Yeah.
Thought they spoke.
And also, they were actually still around at the same time that the church was that the Western Roman Empire was falling. So they've been around for that long.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think the source of most of these oddities is that the Vatican City, in effect, is the nationalization of Roman Catholicism. And as religions and nations are built on fundamentally different lines, the country acts more like a legal fiction intended to appease the Pope than as an actual functioning independent nation, like, say, Saudi Arabia or Israel, though they're also very strange due to the religious significance of that comes from their control over holy sites. Wow. But Vatican City takes us to the extreme of extremes. And that's why Vatican City is at the top of this list. It's the country that behaves the least like a country.
I was going to say, we didn't need, cannibal dudes. We didn't need chainsaw guys. It's just how it exists and the fact that it's there, and it's the context surrounding it that make it just
Yeah,
What? Like when you enter Vatican City, like, do you go through customs? And like, do you have to go through the TSA checkpoint and stuff like that?
I think they do actually. It's
yeah.
It just has a very different kind of setup. It's also like if, say, I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's this country called Sealand that was formed by an oil rig, or actually it was an oil rig. I think it was like this like naval lookout a few miles off the coast of England.
Really?
And some guy and his family moved in, and they declared their independence as the Republic of Sealand.
Sealand.
And I think the British for a while just didn't take it too seriously, but eventually they actually stepped in. They declared that it actually wasn't open. It wasn't actually free real estate.
Wow. Man, well, that was a pretty intensive dive into this list, I've got to say. Okay, so just recap. Number 7 was Turkmenistan. Number 6 was Bhutan. Number 5 was Equatorial Guinea. Number 4 was Oman. Number 3 was Haiti.
Yep. Second place is Paraguay, and number 1 at the top of the list is Vatican City.
There you go, guys. Next time someone asks you where some weird places are, you know your answer. So thanks, Devon, for doing the research and getting all the info on this. I'm leaving this episode recording wiser than I was when I entered it, although I'm also just a little more disturbed at some of the things I learned. We have a lot of episodes, not a lot, but we have quite a few on there, episodes 1 through 7. So be sure to check those out, guys. We've been working hard to get this podcast off the ground. Devon's been doing a lot of research. And I guess we'll just catch you guys on the next one. Yeah?
Until then.
All right, guys. Until then. I don't know. Let's keep it strange.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening in. You can follow us at the World History Addicts podcast account on Instagram for new posts, reels, and releases. Thanks again, and have a great day.